Hello YouTube, I am Dr. Robiul. I work as a lecturer of pathology in a medical college hospital and I am making this video for my students. Hope someone finds this helpful. Okay, now today's topic is cell injury. In this video, we will try to define cell injury, then discuss the common causes of cell injury, and since hypoxia is an important cause of cell injury, so we will briefly discuss on hypoxia and then we will discuss the mechanism of cell injury. Since cell injury is a long topic, so I will make this video part by part. So this is part 1, and in the part 2 that I will hopefully upload in a week, we will discuss about irreversible cell injury that will include necrosis and apoptosis. Okay, so let's begin. First question, what is cell injury? To understand cell injury, first you have to know another term, that is cellular adaptation, because cell injury occurs when cellular adaptation is not possible or that is failing. Okay, so what is cellular adaptation? Always remember, the cells of our body, they have a power, they have a capacity to respond to stressful condition by changing themselves. Okay, so that is known as cellular adaptation. Cellular adaptation is a reversible change in either the size of the cell, the number of the cell, the phenotype or function of the cell in response to change in environment. Okay, so that is cellular adaptation, change in the size, number, phenotype or function of a cell in response to change in an environment. But there are some conditions when the stressful condition is so severe that the cells cannot undergo adaptation. That is the time when the cells will get injured. Okay, so now let's look at the definition of cell injury. So as you can see, I have written in the board, cell injury results when cells are stressed so severely that they are no longer able to adapt, or when cells are exposed to inherently damaging agent or suffering from intrinsic abnormality. Okay, so that is the definition of cell injury. I am repeating the definition again. Cell injury results when cells are stressed so severely that they no longer able to adapt, or when cells are exposed to inherently damaging agent or suffering from intrinsic abnormality. Okay, so now that we have cleared the definition of cell injury, now we will discuss what are the common causes of cell injury. So as you can see, I have written a lot of causes. The first cause is hypoxia. Okay, so what is hypoxia? Hypoxia means lack or reduced amount of oxygen in the tissue, and we will discuss that after a while. The second cause is physical agent. Physical agents can cause cell injury. Say for example, any mechanical trauma, extreme heat or extreme cold, that is burn as well as deep cold, both can cause cell injury. Other physical agent includes atmospheric pressure, radiation, even electricity. All these physical agents can cause cell injury. The third cause of cell injury was different chemical agents. Now you will see in your textbook that there is a line that's saying that if you want to list all the chemicals that can cause cell injury, the list will be limitless, because any chemical substance in abnormal amount can cause cell injury. Say for example, glucose. We are always thinking about the importance of glucose. That's the only food for our brain cells, remember? But do you know that a high dose of glucose is toxic and that can cause cell injury? Similarly, high dose of salt is also toxic. And if we mention different types of poisons, surely they can cause cell injury. For example, cyanide, arsenic, all can cause cell injury. So the list of chemical agent is actually limitless. Okay. The next cause of cell injury was by some infection. It can be viral, bacterial, protozoal, parasite, etc. Okay. The next point was immunological cause. Now remember, immune system is very important for our body. It protects us from different harmful endogenous as well as exogenous agents, but the problem is sometimes the immune system finds our own cells as enemies, and they start to produce some immune response against our own cell, and that is a term known as autoimmunity, and that can cause cell injury. Okay, the next point was nutritional imbalance. Note that I have said nutritional imbalance. I did not say malnutrition. The reason is both undernutrition as well as overnutrition can cause cell injury. In developing country, malnutrition is the important cause of cell injury, and in the developed country, in the Western country, they are having overnutrition, and that can also cause cell injury. So always keep that in your mind, that the term will be nutritional imbalance, not malnutrition, because overnutrition can also cause cell injury. The last cause of cell injury, as written here, you can see, is genetic problem. Okay, and remember, genetic is a vast topic, so I will just give you some examples. Say for example, a patient of Down syndrome, there is a trisomy 21. The chromosome number 21 is 3 in number instead of 2 in that patient's cells, so that will cause different types of problem as well as cell injury. And if I give you another example of genetic cause of cell injury, think of an enzyme that got mutated, and as a result of mutation, that enzyme cannot function properly, and as a result of that improper function, the cell cannot function properly and getting damaged. Okay, so that is another example of cell injury. Okay, so now that we have discussed the definition and causes of cell injury, now we will focus on this point, that was hypoxia. So what does hypoxia mean? Hypoxia means reduced amount of oxygen in the tissue. Okay, and always remember, there are 3 causes of hypoxia. They are ischemia, there is another term hypoxemia that I will discuss after a while. So the first cause of hypoxia is ischemia, the second cause is hypoxemia, and the third cause is decreased oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Now don't get scared, I will discuss all these things one by one. Okay? So the first cause of hypoxia is ischemia. So what do we mean by ischemia? Ischemia means reduced blood flow. It can be arterial blood flow or it can be venous blood flow. Both can cause ischemia. Let me give you some example. Say for example, a patient developed coronary atherosclerosis. That means atherosclerosis of his coronary artery, the artery that supplies to the muscles of the heart. Okay, then what will happen? Atherosclerosis will make the lumen of the coronary blood vessel narrow. So now there will be reduced arterial blood flow through that coronary artery, and that will result in something called ischemia. So that is easy to understand. But now you may be asking, then why does decreased venous blood flow can cause hypoxia. To explain that, I have to draw an image. Okay, so if you recall your anatomy or physiology lectures, you know how blood flows, you know. If I draw a simple diagram, you will see, say for example, this is an artery, then blood goes from artery to capillary, right? And then from capillary, what happens? Here gas exchange occurs, nutrient exchange occurs, and then the products of metabolism and other toxic substances that are not needed for that cell, they go through the venous system. Okay, so this one is the artery. I'm drawing A, this is the capillary, and this is the vein. Okay, so why would we have ischemia when there is decreased venous outflow? The thing is, if we decrease the blood flow here, that blood will accumulate here, and that will result in decrease of the arterial flow as well. So the point I'm trying to make here is, if someone has reduced venous blood flow, fresh blood will not come to those areas, and that will also result in ischemia. Okay, so that is about ischemia. The second cause of hypoxia was hypoxemia. Okay, now at the end we have mia. That means here hypoxemia means reduced amount of oxygen in the blood. Okay, so what is that? To understand hypoxemia, we have to know how blood is oxygenated. Okay, so let's draw another simple diagram. Say for example, I am drawing the lungs. Okay, this is one lung. These are the respiratory trees, you know, and at the end of those trees we have alveoli, right? So what happens when we are inspiring air, when we are taking air, oxygen is entering in our lungs. Okay, the pressure of oxygen in the inspired air is known as PiO2. Okay, so what happens when we are taking that air? That air is coming inside our lungs and then it is going to the alveoli. The pressure in the alveoli is written P big A O2. Okay, and from the alveoli, what happens? Gas exchange occurs, and then that oxygen can go to the blood, and then that is called P small a O2, and from the blood it will go inside the RBC and bind with the hemoglobin, and we will express that thing as SaO2. Okay, so hypoxemia means this one, this P small a O2, this one is reduced. Okay, so that is hypoxemia, and that can cause hypoxia. So now you may be asking, then what are the causes of hypoxemia? What can result in reduced amount of P small a O2? Okay, the first cause of hypoxemia is decreased inspired air. You know, if it is very simple, if we reduce this thing, since this goes here and that thing goes there, so if we can reduce this thing, this entire thing will be reduced. So what are the causes when we are having reduced amount of inspired air? The most important cause is, of course, you know, high altitude. Okay, so in high altitude, the amount of oxygen in the inspired air will be less than normal. So as a result, the entire chain, P big AO2, P small AO2, all will be reduced. Okay, so that's one cause of hypoxemia. The second cause of hypoxemia is hypoventilation. Okay, say you are in a normal atmospheric pressure, there is plenty of oxygen in the air, but you have problem in your ventilation system. Say for example there is some respiratory depression in your medulla, so you cannot use your respiratory system properly, so you are hypoventilating. Now what happens when you hypoventilate? The reason we ventilate is to get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. So when we are doing less ventilation, carbon dioxide will accumulate. Okay, and as carbon dioxide will accumulate, and that will also result in decreased PaO2. Okay, so that is another cause of hypoxemia. There are other causes of hypoxemia, and they include ventilation defect and perfusion defect. Okay, so what do you mean by a ventilation defect? Say for example a patient may have respiratory distress syndrome, and there is a lack of surfactant in his lungs, and that is causing collapse of the distal airways. Okay, and since his distal airways are collapsed, so surely he cannot do sufficient gas exchange. There is problem in his ventilation, and that will result in some ventilatory defect causing hypoxemia. Okay, the next cause of hypoxemia was perfusion defect. Okay, in these cases ventilation is okay, but the lung doesn't have sufficient blood supply. There may be area where we have plenty of gas, but they cannot go into the blood vessel because there is not enough blood vessel in those areas. Okay, so that is perfusion defect. So all those things can cause hypoxemia. So I am repeating the causes of hypoxemia again. The first cause was high altitude. The second cause was hypoventilation, that can be due to some medullary depression of the respiratory center. The third and fourth causes were ventilation defect and perfusion defect. So all those things can cause decreased amount of oxygen in the blood, and that can result in hypoxia. The third cause of hypoxia was decreased oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. And I'm sure you have heard the term anemia. In anemia we are having reduced amount of hemoglobin. And always remember, hemoglobins are important because they bind with oxygen and make something known as oxyhemoglobin, and that is how oxygen are transported inside the red blood cell. So whenever we are having problem with hemoglobin, say for example the patient has anemia, then there will be reduced oxygen to the tissue. There are other causes that can cause reduced oxygen carrying capacity. Say for example, if there is increased breakdown of the red blood cell, that can happen in some hemolytic disease. That can also result in decreased oxygen carrying capacity. And other causes include sequestration of RBC in the spleen. Okay, so these are the causes of hypoxia, and now we will discuss the mechanisms of cell injury. So what are the mechanisms of cell injury? As you can see in the bottom of the board, I have drawn a series of mechanisms. All of these can cause cell injury. One mechanism is via ATP depletion. ATP, when ATP is less, it will cause a lot of effect, which we will discuss after a while. Another mechanism is via mitochondrial damage, which can cause leakage of some pro-apoptotic molecules. some molecules that promote apoptosis, and that will result in cell injury and cell death. Another mechanism of cell injury is where we are having increased calcium entry, and that will have a lot of effect by increasing mitochondrial permeability and as well as by activating certain enzymes. Another mechanism of cell injury is the reactive oxygen species. They can damage lipid, protein and DNA and cause cell injury by damaging these lipid, protein and DNA. Okay? Another way a cell injury can occur is via membrane damage, and I'm sure you know our cells have a lot of membrane, say for example cell membrane, lysosomal membrane. All those membranes can be damaged. There is another way cell injury can occur, and that is via misfolded protein, and they also can promote apoptosis. Okay, so all these are the overview of the mechanism of cell injury, and now we will try to discuss some of those. The most important mechanism was via ATP depletion. Recall that we said the commonest cause of cell injury was hypoxia. In hypoxia, as there is lack of oxygen, so electron transport chain cannot function properly, so we are having reduced amount of ATP. Now what will that do? So if you look at the image I have drawn here, so when we are having reduced ATP, our body needs to generate ATP. So how will we generate ATP without oxygen? That is something known as anaerobic glycolysis. Okay, so what will happen? We will produce ATP, but not sufficient ATP. Okay, the amount of ATP produced by anaerobic glycolysis is less. But however, there will be also some lactic acid produced in anaerobic glycolysis, and that will lower the pH, and that will also cause chromatin clumping. Okay, so the acidic environment will cause clumping of the chromatin. The next thing that will happen when we have reduced ATP is there will be some problem in different pumps in our cell. Recall that our cell has a lot of pump to carry different types of electrolyte in and out of the cell. Say for example, sodium, potassium, ATPase pump, calcium pump. All these pumps, they require energy for active transport. So when we are reducing ATP, those pumps will fail. So what was the function of sodium, potassium, ATPase pump? Its function was to carry sodium from inside of the cell to the outside in exchange of calcium. Okay, so that thing will now reverse. So sodium will accumulate inside the cell, and with sodium there will accumulate water. So as sodium and water begins to accumulate inside the cells will swell up. So that will result in cell swelling. And also the endoplasmic reticulum, they will also begin to swell. That we can say is known as endoplasmic reticulum swelling. And remember, when a cell is getting swelled, the microvilli on its surface will be lost. Say for example, if this was a cell and this finger-like projection on the surface are known as microvilli, but when we are filling this cell up with water and electrolyte, those things will disappear. Okay, so that is what will happen when we are having reduced sodium potassium pump activity. The last thing that will happen due to ATP depletion is detachment of ribosome. And recall that ribosomes are important for our protein synthesis. So when the ribosomes are getting detached from their site, it will cause decreased amount of protein synthesis. So this concludes the part 1 of the cell injury video. In the second part, I will continue discussion of the other mechanisms of cell injury, followed by irreversible cell injury and cell death. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope you found this helpful. Take care. Thank you.